was reading about how you've been doing research on the religious kind of nuns, the people who put down nothing as their religion, and I guess that's similar to how people then politically might just not turn up or not vote, at all, rather than voting for Donald Trump. And you've been doing some work, I guess, on people who have maybe used to identify as Protestant or evangelical Christians that have then now, rather than becoming atheists, they've become kind of, well, I should say, rather than becoming kind of hardline atheists, they're more like, I don't know, or I'm not sure. People that are disenfranchised almost from their church because they don't feel like it represents them. Is that something that's still happening, where this rate of are people still dropping away from the church, or what has your research shown in that regard?
Right. So it really started to trend upward at about 1994, 1995. And what's interesting then is that's when Republicans took control of Congress for the first time in 40 years. And it was kind of the first sort of big showing of the Christian right being, in control and operative in American politics. And that's when the rate of the nuns starts to go up from about 5%. And it kept rising up until about 2018 to maybe 25 to 30%, depending on the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Our most recent read suggests that maybe it's starting to level off. But it all depends. It's just one data point, but that data point wasn't going up like we expected it to keep doing, and it kind of leveled off. So we'll see what 2020 surveys tell us about that rate. But it had just a steady rate of increase all across that period from 1995 to almost 2020. And we found that, politics is really driving people's decisions in church when they disagree politically, especially if they aren't really well connected within the congregation. So if they're not very active, they're not attending very much, then they might use that distance, that political distance, to make a decision to leave the congregation.
Yeah, that was my next question. And that can be, that can be taken at face value for, you would think a lot of things contribute to people dropping away, but in your opinion, then this political link or politics from the pulpit, this is playing a part really in the people leaving?
Yeah, well, I think you're exactly right. I think there's a lot of things that can do that. And I think our official position among the co-authors that did that work is that politics is just one of many things that they might use. So they can feel like no one here really kind of represents my interests. Nobody's interested in cycling in this congregation. So why would I stay, what have you? So there's a lot of things that might contribute, but politics is one that's very present and very personal. And so they could use that. In fact, we found that the disagreement over Trump in 2016 drove people out of their churches. So there were some evangelicals that weren't on the Trump train, as we know. And a good number of those folks actually left their congregations as a result. So, it kind of plays out. It's on the left, it's on the right, it's in the center. Politics can be driving people out, kind of no matter where it is. And so, so this is actually something kind of curious. We're talking here, and our conversation is suffused with politics and religion. But we found out that politics wasn't incredibly commonly talked about. And clergy actually weren't talking about Trump that often. So there wasn't really sort of a bunch of platoons out there that were mobilizing the troops to talk about it. And I think it's because of this dynamic that they're really sort of afraid of their congregations falling apart on for political reasons.
Yeah, I've experienced this before. I mean, I would say that in the UK, in my experience, the church as a whole, in terms of their political views, I would say are more liberal than the American evangelical, that more liberal than what their views would be. I see when I think of the church in America, it's very, and I've heard this from different people that have lived there or are from there, but, pro-Republican, pro-Israel in some extent, Zionist, kind of these sort of things, these very conservative viewpoints, very anti-abortion, very anti-gay, these are the things that come to mind about the American evangelical political stance. Whereas in my experience in the UK, what I found is that the church tend to have more of a liberal viewpoint. And that was almost, I'm probably someone with more naturally conservative inclinations, which is I definitely feel like the minority for sure in that. I remember when Brexit happened, I was one of the only people that I knew that was even for Brexit, you know, and that's not, again, like I don't want to, this is nothing about people said, oh, you're all Brexiteers are racist and all this sort of thing, you know. It's nothing necessarily to do with that. And I guess that misunderstanding is what's, you know, it caused such a division in the UK on that issue. But I find, you know, in church over the next months and years, I would hear more about this. People would talk about the great negatives in the world, the great sort of evil forces, and you would hear these things rhymed off. Donald Trump, Brexit, all these things that are, you know, it just always came in a sequence of things that are bad in the world. And like when you see the Trumps of the world and the Brexit happen, you know, and it actually it posed such an issue to me in terms of I then experienced perhaps what the people that you're talking to in your research are experiencing in terms of how political viewpoints expressed from the pulpit can actually really turn people off from their congregation. Particularly for me, it wouldn't have driven me away from my faith, but it definitely would have driven me away, you know, from particular church events or whatever, you know, that I would have thought, you know, if certain people are speaking, if there's this event happening and there's someone speaking, you know, I would think, oh, well, I don't know if I want to go there because it's just going to be rattled off about how people who vote the way I vote are against the church, you know. And this is something I can definitely understand how politics from the pulpit can turn people off. I also understand how it can be an excuse in some ways. But to me, it's just very interesting how there's differing sort of viewpoints in terms of the church culture almost, that I would say over here, it's definitely very liberal, but over in America, it would be the church is almost synonymous with conservatism. So
in some ways, except, you know, there's plenty of congregations out there that are quite liberal, that take, you know, moderate to liberal stances on a lot of things. And of course, the denominational bodies themselves, depending on which ones we're talking about, tend to lean pretty liberal. There was a very large grouping of evangelical denominations actually that came out in favor of combating climate change, for instance. And they're a lot of signatories to reform immigration in a way that was a little bit more humane, and certainly wouldn't agree with the way that Donald Trump has gone on immigration. So there's a lot of different viewpoints, but you're right. At least the way that the probably public thinks about American religion is it's synonymous with conservatism. And in some ways that's a real shame, because there's a really vibrant debate that can go on amongst religious believers and others over the direction of public policy.
That's definitely what I'm seeking to provide in terms of these podcasts. I would talk to anyone from any persuasion, because I think that talking about these issues is the best way to obviously for people to learn and see where they actually, what they actually believe, what they think about, so it's definitely, it was tricky for me to have a lot kind of thrown at me. And, I wanted to talk to people from all viewpoints, so that, so there was that broad sort of reflection of all the different views that are in the church, community. But I guess where I'm going with this is, if we're thinking of the survival, I guess, of the church, when people say it's only a generation away from extinction, is more political engagement something that you believe would be harmful in terms of the church, or should the church then stay out of it more and sort of not really engage with political issues, which is more likely to drive these nuns, these people that are leaving,
No, it's a really difficult question and a thorny one. And I think that many people have come down on the side of being relevant, of staying relevant and engaging in modern culture and its problems. And I think and I'd probably put myself in this camp, although I'm not part of our congregation, to say that you might want to stop short of advocating for particular policies, but especially for advocating for particular candidates. That's the part that's really off-putting to many people. And trying to cross that line of political partisanship is something that almost no one can do at this point. No one's willing to change their partisan affiliation for almost any reason. So going that far is problematic. But people do want some robust engagement with a kind of orientations, values, worldviews that would help them make good decisions and decisions that they can be proud of across their life, whether it's about consumerism or political choices or personal choices. And so continue to have a robust kind of values and worldviews discussion. I think is something that would turn many people on and not turn too many people off. But once it gets attached to a particular candidate, then it becomes problematic and probably tends to taint a lot of what they want to do, in the world. So kind of maintaining this is something I think that probably applies to a lot of groups, is maintaining a sense of independence, right? Of, we're going to offer our perspective and not get tied to any other organization, maintain our distinctiveness and our mission in the world is probably the place to head.